We do have All In coming up this Sunday, and Todd asked Brandon this off the top, but I'm kind of curious how you're viewing this show for AEW, and being that they're at this very interesting tipping point with the pending announcements that are coming. It's a return to Wembley Stadium, and certainly there are momentum issues for the company, but there is also this gigantic show that they have to build towards on Sunday. How are you viewing Sunday's show, just in terms of the historical value that it represents for AEW?
Yeah, I don't know that it has a lot of historical value, in the sense that the first one I think is going to sort of loom larger than this one in people's memories. I think it'll be a strong show in the ring, as AEW show, pay-per-views almost always are. As far as the build and the interest in it, I mean, I have mixed feelings. On the one hand, I feel like they've done a good job on television making the biggest matches feel important. I think they've done a good job with Danielson and Swerve, and the way that they've been building it up, I sense that there's going to be a pretty nice crescendo tonight, in the sense that they've spent weeks now with different people essentially arguing that Danielson needs to get more motivated, he needs to get more fired up, he needs to get more into this thing. And I think this is going to be the show where Danielson finally gives the big rah rah speech where he talks about how important the match is to him after building it up over a long period of time. So I think they've done a good job with that. I think they've done a good job with the Tony Storm Ryan May match. I think they've done a good job with Mercedes and Britt Baker. I'm not as much of a fan of the Osprey MJF build, but your mileage may vary on that one. So I feel like they built up a number of the matches quite well. I think that the matches have been built up better this year than last year, where a lot of the hook was just first show at Wembley. But on the flip side, I think a big component of any show, doing well overall, or the promotion doing well overall, is the feeling of excitement on the television. And that's been a part of WrestleMania every year, and why it's become such a large show in the context of WWE is not only is the show itself big, but the weeks leading up to it are very big as well. There's of course Royal Rumble, which has become the number 2 show, but the weekly television, there's a lot more excitement during that stage of the year. The shows tend to sell more tickets. That isn't as much of an issue now because tickets are selling pretty well throughout the year. But you've got more interest in that. You've got excitement for the appearances on the television show. The shows just feel exciting and hot, and that is definitely not the feel with AEW television shows right now. I mean, I've been watching Collision and Rampage and Dynamite over the last few weeks, and it feels like 80% of the matches you know exactly what's going to happen. Half of the other matches you don't know what's going to happen, and you're expecting a bad finish, you get a bad finish. And I just don't sense that there's a lot of fun or exciting vibes in the weekly television. It's hard to be that dialed in to the pay-per-view when the weekly television feels flat, even if the matches feel like they're going to be important.
In terms of looking at a year out that they have had to promote this show, I mean, they made the decision last year at All In to make the return date announcement. At that time period, Todd, were you expecting that there would be an inevitable drop off? I don't think anyone's looking at 50,000 as any kind of disappointment, but just looking at where AEW was a year ago coming out of that Wembley show, and we can even take away so much of the Punk discussion that followed that show, but in terms of a year out, returning to Wembley, did you see that as a risky strategy on AEW's part, or something that here is a very hungry part of the world for an AEW product that is coming off this incredible event that they staged a year ago in terms of reception and tickets sold?
It was certainly a risky strategy to some degree, in that you asked whether it's inevitable, and yeah, it was inevitable it was going to go down, because last year they did not sell it out. And the idea that you're going to be able to sell more tickets the second year than you would the first year for an event where so much of the hook is we're going to run this big stadium for the first time, that was practically impossible, that they're going to draw more live tickets sold the second year than the first. With that said, the question was, how much would they drop off? And it was a risk. If they dropped off to a certain degree, that it would reflect badly on the company. But it was also an opportunity to make a lot of money off of a big gate that they would not get otherwise if they did not try running at a stadium of a comparable size. So I viewed it as a risk, but I viewed it as a calculated risk, and on balance a good idea. And I think it is turned out that way. I think that it was a good idea to run another event. They've got what I think will be a show that will still feel very big. We'll draw them a big gate. I don't think it'll be a drop off such that it reflects negatively on the company. Now, Unfortunately, there's been drops in other measures of their business that I think reflects more negatively on the company in the past year that don't relate to just the specific attendance of those two shows. But when you just look at the attendance this year at Wembley versus the attendance last year at Wembley, I think it's perfectly respectable, and I don't think anyone other than people that are specifically looking to go after them would think too negatively of the attendance this year.
Yeah, and we've seen Dynamite attendance is down. I want to say roughly 20% as I try to pull it up, and the ratings for Dynamite are down. Rampage is kind of leveling off, and of course, Collision is way down from before. Um, I listen every week, Todd, but maybe some people listening haven't. What are the reasons, do you think, for why AEW's popularity is not as strong as it was a year ago or 2 years ago?
Well, there's some ongoing problems, and I think a lot of it is just chickens coming home from to roost from mistakes made in the past. I mean, I think the key period where AEW lost its footing was in the second half of last year when they made MJF sort of this goofy comedy champion. They're doing these comedy sketches each week on television with him and Adam Cole. And the show became more and more WWE like in its presentation. And that turned off, I think, a significant portion of the audience that went to AEW hoping that it would be an alternative to WWE. And it still felt like an alternative to WWE for much of the time that it was there. WWE got hotter, but and that's been used as an excuse in a lot of circles for why things dropped off. But AEW remained doing quite well for an extended period of time after the point that WWE got hot. It was the period last year when the product, and it wasn't just Adam Cole and MJF. You started seeing more in the way of WWE style gimmicks, more comedy sketches on television, more things that did not feel like a distinct product from what WWE was doing, along with the fact that around the same time you added Collision, you added more television each week, which wasn't typically that exciting, and that made the excitement of Dynamite each week feel a little bit diminished as well. And so you had a number of factors there, and you started to see the decline in live attendance. And so many times over the years with pro wrestling companies, you see a decline in live attendance, and then that's followed up later by a decline in television ratings, and that's exactly what we saw here. And it sort of caught up with them, and now they're at a lower point. With that said, there's a number of issues that are ongoing that don't relate to last year's more comedy oriented top of the card, because at least they removed that from the top of the card. Swerve, Samoa Joe, they haven't been doing comedy sketches to build up their matches. That part is gone. They still have, though, an increasing number of WWE style characters. They've brought in the maximum male models. Granted, you can't blame that in a significant portion given they've only been around for a couple weeks, but they're part of a larger trend. Tony Storm, very popular character, similar deal. It's a very WWE like character presentation. The Acclaimed, a very WWE like presentation. There's all over the television show, they feel like they have less of a distinct identity, which frankly they never did a great job of doing, is describing what they are distinct from WWE. And you can compete against WWE by just producing a better overall product, even if it isn't that distinct. When WWE isn't doing that well, when WWE is doing well, you need to have some sort of distinct calling card, and they don't. I think they've fallen too much into the trap of having too many matches where you know exactly what's going to happen. It's made the shows feel less exciting on a week-to-week basis and less important. And then another big one as well is that when they started out, they only had a few titles, and they've just added more and more and more and more titles. And not only have they added more titles, but a lot of the titles are held by top people. Okada's got his championship, and he's just sort of content, as a major figure of wrestling for his title. You've got MJF and Ospreay contending for another title that is presented as a top title. Those are top guys. And when you have all of these different titles and everyone is holding around a trinket when they wander on a television, and there isn't as much of a sense that there's a differentiation between, and the women's division too, like they've got two top women's titles, and it's hard to discern which one really symbolizes you're the best. And when you've got all of these titles where they all feel about the same level, and there isn't this sense of everyone's competing to try to prove they're the best because what the big goal is, that's to me a big key of most wrestling companies, is having the ultimate goal that everyone's working towards, and they've lost that as well. And so that's something that I think that they would benefit from refocusing on with fewer titles, and not having the titles have distinct identities. In other words, a secondary title is a secondary title rather than just an alternate world title for someone that isn't wrestling for the thing that's called the world title right now.
Yeah, I think the way one thing I would add to that is that there's the absence of CM Punk, who was by far
Mhm.
their biggest star and draw. And I would characterize, to try to put it kind of succinctly for people in a counterintuitive way, is that AEW basically lost their top babyface. And around the same time, they lost their top heel, who was Vince McMahon, who really offered them an opportunity to contrast themselves against this Vince McMahon product. And once Vince McMahon started to be more removed from the WWE product, and in a lot of people's view became better, I think it's caused an identity crisis for AEW, in that it doesn't know what to it defined itself in contrast to this product that people were dissatisfied with, and now that people are less dissatisfied with it, it I AEW's purpose in life is less clear. And so I don't, do you accept that premise? And what should AEW's identity be if in this case, where there's the reason for their existence and the reason for their contrast against the big player is no more?
Yeah, I do agree with that premise. I think on sort of both sides, the the avoiding having you not having Vince to go up against anymore and to contrast yourself against, along with, and I would group Punk along with Cody Rhodes as people that were part of AEW, left for WWE and became key components of WWE's success. Cody more so than Punk, creating the sense that direction had swung in the other way, that rather than having AEW be the place that the stars are looking to jump to, WWE becomes the place that the stars are looking to jump to. And that can affect not only the perception of the company overall, but that can affect the perception of some of the stars. In other words, if you have, if the story is if the perception is, I should say, the perception is that the wrestlers want to be in AEW, which is the perception for a long period of time. Then when someone jumps to AEW, it's like, oh my God, this is so exciting. You got this person that's going there. He's got, or he or she has got ideas of what they're going to do. They've got big plans. And this is another indication this promotion is doing well. If on the other hand, the perception is more, well, people look to go to WWE once they're really looking to get things heated up again or looking to make it back to that top level. Then when someone signs with AEW, it's like, well, there must have been some reason. It's like, well, I guess they weren't cutting it in WWE, or they didn't have good options. They weren't made a good offer. It becomes less exciting than it would be if the perception was that the momentum was flowing the other way. So that can affect the excitement of different signings and the perception of the company overall. Then the point you bring up with Vince McMahon, in terms of being able to compete against him, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you can sort of create this, you're going against this negative company, then just not being the negative company is a great thing. And that goes back to what I mentioned a while ago, which is you want to have a positive identity of who you are that is different than what the other company is doing. Because WWE can always just be, the top company. That's their identity. We're WWE. We're number one in pro wrestling. Whatever we do just becomes associated with what pro wrestling is. If you want to be an alternative to that, you need to have some sort of a distinct identity. In Japan, there have been lots of promotions that have been very successful over the years, but almost all of them have a different identity than what the number one company is. If you look back and, when Japanese wrestling was very popular in the 1990s, New Japan was the number one company overall. They had the biggest stars, they had the biggest production, the Tokyo Dome shows at a greater rate than other things. All Japan, though, was thriving because All Japan, their thing was the work rate. We've got these young guys, we've got Misawa, Kawada, Kobashi. You get the best action in All Japan. You get clean finishes, not a lot of nonsense. This is the promotion for real wrestling fans. You've got UWFI with Takada. We're real, shoot fighting, not these, nonsense people over here. We got the real tough guys like Takada and Yoji Anjo and, the other guys who can really fight as opposed to the other guys. You've got, Atsushi Onita. He's got the death match stuff and he can draw really big, for stadium shows with that based on his charisma and based on being able to have these, these death matches that the other promotions are not doing. And that, if you're not able to say we're the alternative of big bad number one player, and at that point there wasn't a lot of resentment, as I understand it. I mean, maybe there was, to some Japanese people like New Japan, we hate New Japan, but I don't recall a lot of people that really hated New Japan. But it was just they happened to be number one, and a lot of other people had their own identities. You could get into whichever one you like the best, but in contrast here, if your thing is just we're the place for people that don't like Vince McMahon wrestling, then yeah, once Vince McMahon is gone, it becomes a lot harder.
Maybe what you're trying to say is that in order to kind of present that more realism factor, maybe that does give some guidance into the recent meeting that Tony Khan had with Henzo Gracie trained Shane McMahon.
Yeah, I mean Shane. I mean he's different. He's exciting. He's a tough guy. I mean maybe maybe
The
Shane can
Takata
usher
of
in.
this generation potentially.
I mean you're not the first person that said that, but I've
Oh
you know I
God.
it's a it comes up frequently.
Well, that was yeah to be determined the fate of one Shane McMahon.